got 5 more in sessions before we finish at the end of the year. So welcome to all of you. Now before we start, we've got various folk who've got things to say. Linda, have you got any notices?
Just a reminder, if anybody didn't see James Wright doing the ancient graffiti when he was here, we do have it this Saturday. Details are in the brochures online. Ancient graffiti in Grimsby Minster in the afternoon, 2 to 4:30. £10 includes a lovely, wonderful foreign tea.
Your teas are excellent.
Thank you.
Yes, they are.
But if you do come, please,
Over the tea.
please bring a torch or use your phone because you will be looking for the graffiti.
Ah, right, lovely. Judy?
Yeah, I'll stand up. Stand up. Graffiti tours at Lincolnshire Cathedral. That you didn't go to. I think every month now. The 8th of November and the 9th of December, you're here, at 2:15 and 3:45, £5 each. They last about 90 minutes. You need to book, ring the cathedral or book online. Do you want me to give you the number of the cathedral?
Can we get the dates again, please?
561600. 561600, that's Lincoln. The 8th of November, the 9th of December, 2:15 to 3:45, both dates. And it is online, if you look on their website. Yeah. Next term, autumn term, if we're still all here to start winning, thanks to Liz, I've spoken to Alan Archaeology, who have done the excavations around the cathedral, and they're just compiling the results and the data, and they will come and talk to us about it in the autumn. And it sounds really exciting.
So it's massive.
And the other one, I think you also mentioned this, was Sue Allen, the Mayflower. Somebody mentioned Mayflower lady. Well, I'm not sure whether she'll be able to come and talk to us. Is it the 200th bicentennial? Yeah. There's lots about her on the internet, and she is on a TV programme. There's a TV programme on Saturday, the 2nd of November, on Channel 5 at 8:30. She's on that programme, and it's called, is it Mighty Ships? Great Ships or something. I thought, why is she on about ships? But obviously it's the ship, isn't it? Stupid girl. So, so if you want to watch her, it's Saturday, Channel 5 at 8:30. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
I think Audrey's got a few words.
Yes, I was thinking about summer visits for the next term, for those who don't know. After Easter, we try and organise some outings, perhaps related to what we've done, or something somebody knows about that's interesting. We've had some super ones over the years, so I want you to give your mind to it, think about where you might have to go, or if you've heard of any places. And I'll ask you again in a couple of weeks' time to see if you come up with anything. Okay, action.
Anyone else got any notices at all? Well, today's speakers, and I'd like to introduce William Sargent and Julian Parker, because we've got 2 for the price of 1 today. Wonderful. Now, I remember my old Uncle Arthur lived with my grandmother. He was disabled, was my uncle, and I used to go over with my mum to the little village, the little cottage, and I remember him sitting by the fire on a Saturday afternoon with the fading lights this time of the year and listening to the football results on the radio, and he was checking his football ball Cooper to see if he'd won. And he always sat in his Arthur's seat, as we called it, a Windsor chair. Now I wonder whether it was a Lincolnshire chair or not, but that is by way of introduction. Now, I've been reading about William on the Market Raisin News. Very interesting article, and of course it outlines William's passion for chairs, Lincolnshire chairs. And of course, he's brought a number from his huge collection of the Lincolnshire Chair Museum for us to have a look at today. Now, Julian's going to talk from the point of view of Nottinghamshire as well, so I think we're in for a very interesting morning. So I hope you're seated comfortably. So I think William's going to begin. William.
Thank you. Do you know, I've just got a horrible feeling you might be disappointed because it's rather ironic that I'm going to talk about medieval chests.
Oh, right.
Judy did say to me when she emailed me, you'd be studying the medieval period, and the chairs that I'm talking about really are all Georgian or early Victorian period, and she said if you could just mention something about medieval chests, she would be quite happy. So actually, I do know very little about medieval chests, but I'm just going to start off talking about that. But I just want to talk about myself. My name is William Sargent, it says so up there. I've got a huge amount of chairs, dozens and dozens and dozens. And I'm fortunate that I've got the space to keep them. And I need that number of chairs because on each chair there are fingerprints of the maker all over, and when you get large numbers together you can do data analysis on them and you can get them into groups, which you could never do if you just have pictures of them. I do give a lot of talks throughout, mainly throughout Lincolnshire. I've given several this year. Over the last few years I've given numerous talks to groups of people like you, and it does enable me to do a lot of research, and I publish a lot of that online. And if you go to my Flickr photo sharing website, and I'll give you details of that later, there are well over 200 chairs on there. Not all of them are Lincolnshire, but most of them are, and I'm all the time adding to it. And people do send me pictures of chairs from all around the country and even from overseas because they find my presence on the internet. And one of the benefits of giving talks is that I get people interested in the subject. And Julian came to hear me talk quite a few years ago, and he started his own collection, but he mainly concentrates on Nottinghamshire. And I get a lot of people sending me pictures of chairs in the hope that I can identify them for them. And I usually can, because I've now got to understand each different workshop had its own sort of chair, and I can recognise usually most chairs that get sent to me. I'm also a member of the Regional Furniture Society, and I joined the Regional Furniture Society, it must be at least 7 or 8 years ago now. And I think one of the reasons I did that was because I was running out of people to talk to about it, because the research I was doing was moving on all the time. And when I joined the society, I asked a question to a lot of people there about Lincolnshire chairs, and it dawned on me then that they could not often answer the questions I was asking. And it dawned on me that I probably knew more about and had handled more Lincolnshire chairs than anybody else ever had done. Other people had looked at vernacular furniture throughout the whole of the country, but because I live and work in Lincolnshire, it was so easy for me to concentrate on Lincolnshire. The Regional Furniture Society, has anybody ever heard of that before? Right, I would recommend that you look on their website. It's a fantastic group of people. They have hundreds of members. Most of them are passive and they do not do research themselves, but they enjoy all of the events that get put on. And within the group, there are some of the country's leading furniture historians. And I just love being in their company because they talk about some fascinating subjects, and I can offer my little bit about Lincolnshire chairs as well. The other thing that they do, they have a conference every year, and this year it was in Shropshire, the year before it was in Glasgow, the year before that it was in Lowestoft, and you'll be pleased to hear that next year, 2020, the conference is in Lincoln at the end of June. It lasts 4 days, the conference does, and they organise all sorts of excursions, often to private houses with people with some interesting furniture, and it's not open to the public. It's not just furniture. There are people there who are interested in all sorts of subjects, textiles or buildings, and for instance, we will be going up into the cathedral roof to see how that is constructed. And I would urge you to look at their website. It is cheap to join, And one of the benefits of being in the society is that twice a year a newsletter gets published. And I've got one here to show you. There's the regional society's twice yearly newsletter. It has some fantastic short articles in there about recent developments, and also they publish this every year, the Regional Furniture Society Journal. And that can be quite a heavy academic journal. And there's some fascinating things in there, and it's amazing what people study when it comes to vernacular furniture. And that is all part of your subscription if you do want to join. If you join, you can come on some of the excursions we have around Lincoln next June. I will be expecting no doubt to give a talk one evening there, which I'm quite happy to do. And I advise you all to just have a look at that and consider joining. So it is slightly ironic today that I'm going to be here to talk about church chess. But just tell me this. You've been studying the medieval period recently. If any of you went into a church and came across a chest, would you be able to differentiate it if it was a medieval chest or if it was a chest, say, from the 17th century, 18th century? Right. Got a lot of audiences like this. You're right. That's the young lady here said locks. I mean, that is one way. I mean, there's all sorts of ways, but the construction is an essential thing. And what I want to do is start off by showing you, just talk about construction of a chest. And I'll just see if we go the right way. There we are, look at that. I think you would all call that a coffer. They appear all the time at the auctions, and they are so unloved by the antique dealers. And for quite a few reasons. One reason is, you can see that's got its original top on it, so you haven't got a flat surface, and I'll tell you what, dealers just don't like things like that, and neither do people in households. They really like flat surfaces. If you want to get the blankets out of there, or whatever you've got, your silver, maybe hidden in there, you've got to take everything off the top to lift the lid up so you can get at what's inside. These are so cheap to pick up. This is mid-1700s at a guess, and it's all made out of oak, and obviously it is all handmade, and there is no glue in its construction. It was made in a joiner's workshop, not a carpenter's, but a joiner's. And whoever it was, and I'll never know, made a fantastic job out of doing this. I think I actually got this out of one of Golding's auctions many years ago. I've probably still got the receipt for it somewhere. But it's the construction that I'm just going to talk to you about. Every component actually is made out of oak, and you can tell that if I just shine the light. Can you see these little light flecks down there? And there's some here as well. Those are the medullary rays, where the oak has been split perpendicular to its growth rings, and you get medullary rays. And they're so obvious, once you've seen them, you'll never forget them. And that is all made out of oak. But if you just look at the construction of this, it's got two front legs, which go from top to bottom, and it's got two horizontal rails, one all the way across there, and another one all the way across there. And it's got two more vertical ones just to divide it up in the front. And everything is held together, and I don't think you can see. At the end here of that horizontal rail, there is a tenon sticking out, and that is mortised into the side rail, and there's pins driven through to secure it. And there's pins all over this, but you can't see them very closely on this picture, I'm afraid. I'll just point to where you find that there's a pin there, there's a pin there, and there's two more pins there. There's a couple of pins there, a couple there. Everything is secured by pins.
What do you mean by pins? You mean dowels?
Yes, I do. Sorry.
Yeah.
They're sometimes called tree nails. They're made out of wood, very thin. They're usually sharpened to a point for a very good reason. Because when they put the mortise in the tenon, they will actually have a hole so they can mark where to drill the tenon. They take the tenon out, and instead of drilling in exactly the right place, they just drill a quarter of a hole inside of that. So when you put it back together again, and with the pin on the wooden dowel with its point, it can start to go into the hole, but they really have to hit it hard to get all of it through, and it pulls the tenon even tighter. It's a standard technique of actually making these things really almost impossible to take apart. And this is 250 years old probably, and it is tight as the day it was made. Now then, the thing about this technique, this building technique, they did it, it was developed for one really specific reason. And if you're not woodworkers, you probably won't guess it. And they developed this process to stop the wood splitting. The rails themselves on the legs are not going to split because they're not that big. If you have one huge slab of wood, wood always expands and contracts, and it's got the ability to pull itself apart and to split. And I've just gone back onto the other one. There we go. The interesting thing about these chests, and if you ever come across these coffers in an auction or in an antique shop, you can try this, lift the lid up, and I've done it many times with this, put your hand on one of the panels on the outside, put your hand on the panel on the inside, and you can move it. Just maybe 1/16 of an inch. Sometimes they're a bit gunged up with dust and dirt, but if they expand and contract, those three panels at the front can actually expand and contract into the little rebates that sit them in. They are not secured. There's a lot of puzzle faces. Isn't that clever? That is the reason why panel and frame chests were developed, but they haven't been around forever, and it really helps us to date chests. And the next chest I want to show you, isn't that a chest? Isn't that a chest and a half? That's on the internet, there's quite a bit about it. It is really famous. I'll just go back to the Regional Furniture Society again, because some of these furniture historians in the Regional Furniture Society specialise in some things, and it just so happens that the chairman of the Regional Furniture Society is called Chris Pickvance, and he is the country's leading authority on medieval chests. And so I've got a lot of the information by reading his articles and talking to him. And he's the one who's visited this on more than one occasion because it is a famous chest. But this is, in fact, a frame and panel chest. You've got the, go back here again. You've got the two front legs, but these go all the way through. You've got the top rail which runs all the way to the other side, and then you've got another leg, and then you've got the bottom rail. I think you can see there's a pin there, and look, there's 3 pins on the top to hold that top rail down. But in the middle, there is a huge panel. And that again can actually move. But what is really interesting about this chest, and it's not noted on the internet, is that you can date this chest really closely. And the reason being is, because it's Brasenose College, they take note of everything that's happened for the time it's been running. They've got the inventories and the invoices of when this building was built, which houses this chest, and the building was built between 1509 and 1522. Nobody doubts this chest has never been out of this room for one simple reason. You cannot get it out of the room. You can't get it through the windows, and you cannot get it down the stairs. So they believe when this room was built, the components of this chest were taken upstairs, it was hammered together, all the pins put in place, and there it has been forever. 500 years it has been in that one room. So this can be dated, and furniture historians widely believe this is the earliest datable frame and panel chest in this country. Nobody denies that the technique actually started off maybe 10 or 20 years before, in the Low Countries, maybe Holland, maybe Denmark, maybe Belgium, but the technique came across the North Sea because there was huge trade backwards and forwards across the North Sea at that time, as there was centuries before as well. And this is the earliest datable frame and panel chest in this country. Now then, if you're studying medieval things, this really is after the end of the late medieval period, because I think you all realise that the late medieval period extends probably from 1250 to 1500. Would you agree with that? As a loose date.
1485.
Well, thank you. That'll be nicer. 1485 will do nicely.
End of the Wars of Roses.
But you see the point I'm getting at. If you actually go into a church and you see some chests, if you can tell that they are frame and panel construction, really there is no chance of being medieval. If they are different construction, there's a chance that they may be medieval chests. Right. One thing I do sometimes, if I get a spare moment, I often go and have a look around churches, because churches can be a great source of vernacular furniture, and I've found some great chairs in churches, and they have been there, I know, for decades, if not centuries. I live in Stragglethorpe. The neighbouring parish to me is Fenton. I was in Fenton Church 2 years ago looking for chairs, and I walked in there and there was a couple of chests, and I glanced at them. They weren't particularly interesting chests. Walked around the church, couldn't find any chairs, so I took another look at the chests. And one of them in particular, to me, was different to any sort of chest I'd seen before. I did not recognise the construction, and it was really quite crude as well. So I took a picture, as I always do, sent it to Chris Pickvance for his records, not thinking anything about it. Next day, he rang me up in a rather excited state, and he was really interested in this chest that I had found in the neighbouring church. And following to that, he sent me an email with a whole load of dimensions he wanted me to take, and pictures inside and outside as well. So I revisited the chest, did all the photography for him, took all the notes as well, all the dimensions, and sent them back to him. And I'll explain to you why in a little while he was so excited about that. But if we're going to move on to the medieval period, we're going to look at chests which don't include this frame and panelling. Now, if any of us said to our grandchildren or whatever, young children, to make a wooden box, the simple way that everybody would do it would be to get 6 pieces of wood, 2 long ones for the front and back, 2 shorter ones for the sides, 1 for the bottom and 1 for the top. And you would butt joint it. That's a simple thing to do. You'd butt up one to the other and nail them together. That is the simplest way of making a box. They are not particularly solid, and the construction is not good. So most people would probably put iron straps round the corners to actually make them more secure, make them more solid. And the next chest that I want to show you is this one. Look at that. That just sums up what I've said about a simple, plain chest. I never knew this one existed. Once I sent those details back to Chris Pickvance, he sent me several villages, churches that he would want me to visit and take dimensions of certain chests. One of the villages he wanted me to go to was Hackenby. Do you know what Hackenby is?
Yeah, I didn't just
No,
road
that's-
from it.
Somebody down. I didn't. It's down near Bourne, isn't it? It is locked as well, and I got in touch with the church warden, and I went in there to have a look, and there were 2 chests in there. They didn't really know what they'd got, but this is an example of an early boarded chest. I put the date up there. I'm not an expert in dating these things. Those are the dates that Chris Pickvance would put on that chest. 600 years old. It is good grief as well. And the things he would look at, I mean, the design is fairly generic. And I think there was a survey done recently in Suffolk of all the church chests that they knew, and 90% of all the church chests in Suffolk were of this style. And I've got no reason to think Lincolnshire is any different. And you might just actually think for a moment, why is it so important that churches have chests? To store valuable things in, precisely. But there's more to it than that. If you go back to the 11th, 12th, 13th century, the whole of Europe and this country as well was going for a particularly prosperous time. The population was expanding, trade was expanding, the whole of society was getting more and more wealthy. And it became incumbent upon the church to make sure they had somewhere really secure to store things. And to that end, in 1287, there was a synod in Exeter, where all the bishops or wherever it is in the Catholic Church got together, and one of their edicts was that all churches would have lockable chests. Even chapels should have an altar and a chest as well. And that led to a great amount of building of church chests. And you can see with this one, in fact, this one actually has got 2 locks on it. If I can just point it, there's one lock, there's another lock, and you can see there's 2 clasps at the front, and a metal bar would have been put through there. It would have had a piece on the end so you couldn't pull it through, and a lock would have been put on the other end as well. So potentially you would have needed 3 keys to get into this chest. At the same synod, they actually decreed that all churches would have a church warden. And most of them had 2, and I think one of their responsibilities would have been to keep the keys. And if we go back to look at this chest, sorry, I can't go back, there we are. If you notice, it's got 3 locks. The original lock is in the middle, and in the records of Brasenose College, 50 years later, they decided to put 2 more locks on it. All the locks and all the keys are numbered, so you need 3 people, all responsible for one key. They all have to be in the room at the same time to open this chest. That's similar, but it's a lot older and a lot cruder. The interesting thing for me about this chest, can you see there's some sort of liner has been put inside. There's a piece there, and there's a piece at the front there as well. At some stage, this chest has had a lining. Why would you have a lining in a chest?
Keep the damp out.
Keep the damp out. No, it gets damp everywhere in a church. Well, I'll tell you this. Well, the penny might drop when I tell you this. Until recently, Hackenby had a coal fire. The coal was kept in this chest. They don't any longer. Isn't that incredible? So many churches do not realise what precious objects they have got. Now the other thing, and we'll move on now to the Fenton chest. There we are. This is a chest that I found at Fenton a couple of years ago, which so excited Chris. This is a medieval clamped chest, and its construction is quite different to anything I've showed you already. Just have a look at this.
Yes,
Oh, sorry, I'll keep doing that. Here we are. It's got the 2 front legs. There, that one's decorated. That one isn't. That's a replacement leg, but my goodness me, it got replaced an awful long time ago. Up in the corner, it's got the initials TG. I bet that was the name of the joiner who replaced that leg. You look at this and you think that's a bottom rail, and you might just think that's a top rail. No, they are not. All the front is made up of 3 panels. This bottom one here, there's a divide there. That is all one panel there. This piece of wood does not extend into the uprights. The uprights have a long V all the way down them. There's 3 panels there, I think. They are all slotted into the legs. They are pinned, and you can quite clearly see the pin. There's a pin there. You can't see there's another one there, I think. But the whole thing is pinned together. There's no top rail and there's no bottom rail. That is why these are called clamped chests. when they did the survey of Suffolk, only 5% of the medieval chests were of this nature. And up till this one was found, there was only known to be 4 in the whole of Lincolnshire. When you move down to the south east of the country, where Chris actually lives, he lives in Kent, so he knows all the Suffolk, Essex, Surrey, Sussex, Kent chests. There's a lot more of them down there, but we are getting towards the edge of these clamped chests. And I've just done a brief description of them here. These are the clamped chests which are known in Lincolnshire. There's one at Ewerby, there's a second one at Hackenby, that's the reason I went there, one at Glentham, one at Walcott, and now the 5th one is in Fenton.
Which Walcott?
Who said that? I'll get to that in a minute. You're getting in front of me there, that's a good question though. They're usually made from Baltic oak, and you can tell that by lifting up the lid, looking at the top of the leg, and you can count the growth rings on the top. Baltic oak grows in an entirely different climate to the local oak to this country. It's much tighter rings, and it's much stronger, and the carvers prefer it as well. Vast amounts were imported into this country, probably by the Hanseatic League, but during this time, it was common to find it. There is a chance that these chests were made overseas or imported, but it's far more likely that the wood was brought over here and the joiners' workshops used it to make these sort of chests. Yes, and you get this sophisticated carving. Those board chests often are quite crude in comparison. The clamped chests can have some lovely artwork on them. Intersecting round-headed arches, trefoils, hexafoils, and the Gothic sub-arches. The sides have applied wooden grills. I've come across that, and I don't know why they have them. They add nothing to the structural strength of the chest, but when you look on the side, they've got bits of wood applied which look like a cross. There must be some reason, but it eludes me. The vertical stiles are joined to horizontal boards, and they're pegged into long mortises that run all the way down the inside of the legs. This requires joinery skills, so it is seen as higher quality, and it's higher quality than the chest of the boarded construction. And there's that mention there about the Suffolk survey. Walcott, you mentioned Walcott. When Chris asked me to call it Walcott, I thought that was easy. I was coming back from Horncastle one day, coming through Billingham, and Walcott's the next village. Simple. When I got into Walcott and saw the church, it's a brick Victorian church, and I thought, they're not going to have a medieval chest in here. But you never know, they never know. These chests do occasionally get moved around. In antiquity, they could have got moved around. The church warden was actually there by coincidence, so she very kindly opened the church. A quick walk round, I realised there wasn't one in there. And she could see my disappointment. And she asked why, and I said, I thought there was a medieval chest in Walcott. And she said to me, what about the other Walcott? Have you just pointed out? And I didn't know there was another Walcott. The other Walcott's down in between Folkingham and Osenbeck. And it was getting late, so I was going home past Sleaford anyway, so I diverted and went down south, got to Walcott, and it was starting to get dark. There was a board outside, and it's got the vicar's name on it, it's got his telephone number, and it's a good source of finding the key. But there was a chap in the next garden. I went to see him and asked him about the church key. He said he was new to the village and he'd never even been in the church. So that was the blank. Went back to the notice board, got the phone out, rang the vicar, and he answered. And he lived several villages away, as they often do. And I said, I'm stood outside your church in Walcott. Who's got the key? Because I would like to get inside. There was a long pause on the end of the phone. He said to me, that church is never locked. So I went to the door, just pushed the door, and opened. Would you like to see the Walcott clamp chest? Just brace yourselves. That has been probably for 600 years in the same place in Walcott Church. The clergy and the church warden have no idea of what they've got. Isn't that beautiful? That is lovely. It's worth the journey to go and see it. You won't need a key. If you have a look at this, I'll just show you. I mentioned these semicircular arches, and you can see one there, and there's another one there. And then you've got this Gothic sub-arch there. There's 3 of those. There's a trefoils. I don't think there's a that's, is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a hexafoil. You find them in all numbers. There's demi-lunes along the bottom, and I think you can quite clearly see that this is made up of 3 planks. There's one plank, there's a join there. I think there's another join there as well. These are applied vertical pieces, just for the decoration. But now you've seen these clamp chests, you will never forget them. The size of the front leg is enormously wide, with moulding at the edge and a little bit of carving on the outside edge as well. They are lovely things. I'll leave you, when I finish here, I've actually got some notes, and I'll leave them with Judy, and if Judy wants to circulate them here, you can do, so you can actually find out whereabouts these chests are. They're well worth a visit, and I always encourage all of you to keep a lookout for these when you're travelling about. This one has got a replacement lid, and it's so often that you find that chests do have replacement lids. That's a lot older. Sorry.
Is there a reason for the centrepiece not being level to the others? That gap at the bottom?
So which
The main section with all the decoration.
this one here?
Yeah, it doesn't go down to the floor.
No, it doesn't, does it? No, they never do. They never do. I think that probably just helps in the construction of it, because it joins there, but there's no V mortise there for it to go into. It stops, and I think that just makes it stiffer. You can see the pins. There's a pin there. There's a pin there. There's a whole row of pins down there holding it together. And one thing Chris wanted to know was whether this was made out of Baltic oak. So all I have to do is take the lid up, have a look inside, look at that top of that huge leg, count the growth rings, and we can work it out. There's just one problem with that. I couldn't open the chest. I took a lot of pictures of this, I always do. I keep a file for myself, I send a file down to Chris as well, so he's got them for his records, and I also always send a file to the vicar, so he's got a photographic record of the church, of the chest. I asked him if it's possible to find out where the key is for the chest, so I could have a look inside. He wrote back to me a few days later and said he'd spoken to the church warden. The church warden informed him that nobody had ever seen inside the chest. Nobody had seen the key. It might be full of medieval silver. I rather think it'll be hymn books and Christmas decorations though. But they're rare things. Anyway, that's about all I've got to say now about medieval church chests. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way again. And I'll leave this booklet here with you, and if you do get a chance to, when you're in Lincolnshire or in Nottinghamshire, to have a look in churches, to see if you come across any of these chests. If you want to take a picture and send them to me, I will send them down to Chris. I know next year, when we have a conference, he will come up and he'll be looking at all the churches where he knows there are interesting chests to look at. So he'll be recording them. And it'd be wonderful for Lincolnshire if we could find 1 or 2 more. Right, I'm going to stop for a minute and have a glass of water. I'll put that wall cut one back on for you. There's other ways of dating them as well. There are people who write books on medieval metal strap works. I know, it just shows you how focused some people are. And it's the same with the locks as well. What we need is a medieval locksmith. Yes. So we can get this open. It must be possible to do it.
While William's having his drink, who's been in St James's Church Louth? Most of you, I thought you would have done. St Stephen's Chapel on the far end at the right, there are 2 medieval chests in there. One is an entirely iron strapped chest, which is attached to the biggest lump of oak you've ever seen, because it's very hard to nick, because you're just not strong enough. Even if there was 10 of you, you wouldn't be able to lift it up. And the other one is the Sudbury hutch, which was left to the church in 1506 by Thomas Sudbury, a former vicar, and that has on the front Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, who were married in 1486-87, so that just about gets into the medieval period. So next time you're there, far right hand corner, St Stephen's Chapel, two fantastic medieval chests.
Yes. The Louth Church is well worth a visit, just look at those chests.
Excuse me, chests, are they very different to alms boxes? Or is alms boxes another name?
Oh, well, that's an interesting point. I think these would have been used to put arms in. If you look at the dates when these were made, there would have, you're right, the vestments would have gone in there, the silver would have gone in there, arms would have gone there, and also the people donated for the Crusades as well. That would have gone in these chests. That's why they were lockable, and they really often were quite heavy. But you're right, arms boxes, or whether you put the arms box in there with the money, I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm doing some work on Louth Church at the moment, the church warden's accounts from this period.
Right.
And they do mention the Sudbury Hutch, people putting money into it. And you quite rightly say, the vicar, Reverend now, was it Thomas or John, I can't remember now, donated it in his will, and he died in 1504. But just a little aside from that, they did have a hutch, a box, in which was placed silver as collateral from the guilds for building the spire. And it was on the rood screen. This was a massive rood screen that had two organs up there. And it was placed under the figure of Christ on the cross, the rood. And you think it'd be safe up there, wouldn't you? You think nobody would go up there and steal the silver deposited by the church in that box under the figure of Christ on the cross. Guess what? Somebody did. Got up there, a gentleman called John Bailey, allegedly, because we don't know the outcome, stole the silver, or some of it, and he got caught. And the church warden's accounts tell us how he went backwards and forwards from the castle, the trial, and had to pay people to do it, X, Y, Z. But we don't know the outcome. The little bit at the end, I haven't told you about. John Bailey was a priest.
Brilliant.
These accounts are something else, hopefully published in, before I dropped dead anyway, by the Lincoln Records Society. So,
No, I'm well done you for doing things like that, because I mean, a lot of people will certainly want to look at those records, and they're just full of information, aren't they? Right, now then, do you want to hear a bit about chairs?
Yes,
Right, we've only got a few minutes. But I was in this hall a few years ago talking to the Lincolnshire, is it Lincolnshire History and Archaeological Group? And I just devoted the whole evening talking about chairs. And I've just given 2 talks in Louth. One, I spent an hour talking about rush-seated chairs, and another one was talking about Windsor chairs. That's what I normally do, but I'm just going to allude to them, then I need to move on to something else, some new research which you will find fascinating. How many of you have actually seen a chair like that before? Hey, lots of you have. Have any of you got one of these? Yes, I know, they're lovely, aren't they? This is a Lincolnshire rush-seated ladder-back chair. It's got a really distinctive front leg. I think this was made in Spilsby by the Ashton and the Green families of makers, and a very similar chair was made in Louth, and also they were made in Alford as well. Some of their apprentices set up their own workshops in Horncastle, Sleaford, Boston, Spalding, and actually made a variation of this with not quite such a distinct front leg. But they must have made them by the thousands, but I can still find them today. These are so unloved. Auctioneers often do not put them by themselves. They will put them with other things in the lot just to try and get rid of them. I picked these up for £10. I know. And this one to me is really special because it's got the original rushing on it. I've got a pair of these that came from the same shop at the same time. And I know it's the original rushing because these edging slips here, which were put on to protect the edges, have never been off. If you re-rush them, the edging slips come off, it gets re-rushed, They put them on, and because they are loose, they usually get lost. They are so rare to find them with the original rushing with the slips on as well. The interesting thing is that is really fine rushing. Everybody says to me, isn't it lovely to have the fens on hand to get the rush, to rush the seeds? They used Dutch rush. It was a huge industry, and the rush was imported. It's finer than anything you could find down in the fens, and we've got ample evidence of it being brought over by the boatload, specifically for chair bottoming. That's all I'm going to say about those, and they're beautiful chairs, and I hope you managed to find some. The other part of Lincolnshire, the tradition in chair making, you all know this. This is a Windsor chair. This was made in Grantham. How do I know it's made in Grantham?
I'll say so somewhere.
It's got a maker's name on. It's got a name on at the back of the seat here. It says Hubbard of Grantham. So we know it was made in the workshop of Richard Hubbard, who advertised in 1808. I think he did. 1806 was it? And obviously that was in Grantham as well. Grantham and South Lincolnshire had a huge tradition of making Windsor chairs.
What is it, please?
That's an interesting point. The wood, it's so important to identify the wood. The majority of chairs made down in the Thames Valley would contain beech because of the Chilterns was right on their doorstep, and they'd invariably have elm seats. The survey I've done of all the named Lincolnshire chairs I've found, 50% of them have ash seats, and a lot of them are built entirely out of ash. The best ones are often built out of yew, but a lot of Lincolnshire chairs are made out of ash, with virtually no beech anywhere, because beech had not spread up to this far in the country. That is a really useful way of identifying chairs. There doesn't have to be a maker's name on the chair to find out which workshop it was made in. They all left the fingerprints all over it. The first place to look is the wood, and then constructional detail as well. Right, that's all I'm going to say about them, except for one thing. All the time I've been doing research into Windsor chairs particularly, everybody recognises that the earliest ones were made down in the Thames Valley, maybe close to Windsor itself. And the earliest known Windsor chair maker is a chap called John Pitt. He was born in 1714, so he's 21 when he finished his apprenticeship. He would have been 1735, was the very earliest he could have probably built a Windsor chair, but he was actually working in his father's workshop. I think his father was a carpenter or a wheelwright. But a chair does exist with John Pitt's name on it, and it has a label underneath saying this chair was made by John Pitt. That is the earliest one we know. Nobody denies there were chair makers before him, but that is the earliest known chair maker. Well, that all changed last year because there was an article written in the Regional Furniture Society, a simple little article, halfway through, with some lovely pictures, and it's titled, Joseph Newton, Windsor Chairmaker of Fenton in Lincolnshire. That's what I was doing in Fenton Church. I was looking to see if there's any more of his chairs about. Joseph Newton was born in 1676. So that is way before John Pitt. And so that really has changed the whole history of Windsor chairs. And I can't emphasise enough how important this is, because this chap, Joseph Newton, not only is he the oldest known chairmaker in Lincolnshire, he's the oldest known chairmaker in the UK, and because of that, he's the earliest known Windsor chairmaker in the world. And you're all wondering how I know. The whole article is based around two adverts that he put in the Stanford Military. My goodness, are we lucky that he did that. I'll just move on. The chair on the left is the chair with a label underneath it. It says at the bottom, Windsor chair by John Pitt of Slough, 1750, and it is labelled. And then the next one on the right is labelled as well, that's Richard Hewitt. They both probably knew each other. But those are heavy Windsor chairs. Furniture historians have known for a long time that when you go back to the beginning of the 1700s, when Windsor chair making started, you find the term Windsor chair rarely, but you often find the term forest chair. And nobody doubts that the two were the same. The forest chair was a Windsor chair that was made to go in the gardens of the big houses. And they were usually painted green. So there's every chance that this chap, Joseph Newton, was making these sorts of chairs. This is his first advert from 1725, right in the middle. This is, when he put this advert in here, John Pitt wouldn't have even started his apprenticeship. But we'll just read this together because this is fascinating. This is to give notice to all gentlemen and others that have a desire to furnish themselves with the newly fashioned Windsor chairs of the best sort, may be furnished by Joseph Newton the maker, living at Fenton in the parish of Beckingham, Lincolnshire, which is 4 miles from Newark, which is in Nottinghamshire. And there is a chair to be seen at the White Hart in Newark and one at the Angel in Grantham. He proposes to deliver them at these places at 7 and 6 per chair, and at Lincoln at 8 shillings, with as much speed as possible after notice is given. I have to tell you, 7 and 6 and 8 shillings at the time was a lot of money. These are not chairs for the ordinary people or even ordinary merchants. These are probably meant for wealthy people. What is more fascinating is his second advert. He put it in 4 years later, 1729. Just read through this together as well. This is to give notice that Joseph Newton of Fenton in the county of Lincoln, 4 miles from Newark, maketh all sorts of Windsor chairs. The prices for a single is the same at 7 and 6. The seats 2s, 3s and 4s are all 7 shillings per seat and are to be sold at Mr. John Fox's gunsmith in Grantham, Mr. Taylor's at the Reindeer and Mr. John Farrow, both in Newark, and at Mr. John Shackleton's in Nottingham. And gentlemen that has a desire of any of the said chairs may be furnished at any of the above places. They may go by water from Newark to Nottingham, Gainsborough or Lincoln for 3d a seat. That's the transport charge, 3d a seat. I have furnished a great many gentlemen gardeners with them, and they are esteemed above those that come from London, both for ease and fashion. Isn't that amazing? He is the earliest known Windsor chairmaker by a long way. And what was he doing in Fenton? Have you ever been to Fenton? There's nothing there. Big church, but there's nothing there. The thing was, I think he was so close to Newark. And obviously, the two people he mentioned as well, there's John Farrow and there's John Shackleton. Julian's done some research, and both of those are master joiners. And they weren't apprentices, obviously, they weren't journeymen, they were masters. They were a different tier of society. They wouldn't have been aristocracy, or they probably wouldn't have been aristocracy, but they would have been employing several journeymen to make their chairs or other joinery products in their workshops. And obviously, Joseph Newton would have known them. He would have travelled to see them, to show them his chairs, and they would sell them for him. And I think all the masters in the business would have known each other all over the county. I know this is going...
The joiners in those days sold a lot of things. They didn't just do... They were almost like department stores for furniture.
They did. They make everything. There's no such thing as cabinet makers back in these days. Cabinet makers, fine furniture, had not... It was starting to start. Okay. But carpenters would work out in the field, doing roof trusses and things like that. They would use the same technique as joiners, but joiners would tend to work in a workshop, tend to be making furniture. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we found some of his chairs? What is the chance? There's a lot of expectant faces at the minute. What are the chances of finding a chair with Joseph Newton of Fenton stamped on it?
Rare.
No, there's no chance. And I'm certainly not going to show you one, don't worry about that. It just doesn't happen. But this thing about me searching for chairs in churches, several years ago, I happened to be in a church in Newark. And I got accosted by the church warden because I was actually turning the furniture over at the time. And I explained to him what I was doing, and he said, we've got 2 old chairs downstairs in the crypt. So he showed them to me, and my goodness me, they were old chairs. They were in a totally, utterly distressed state with bits falling off them. But I recognised the pattern. One thing I do, like all historians, you search through inventories on the internet, and I have committed, to my knowledge, things that were in the V&A's museum down in London. I had seen a similar chair in the V&A down in London, and I said to them, what are you going to do with these chairs? Honestly, they were in a dreadful state, and I negotiated with them, and actually they just gave me the chairs. Because I said to them, these are worthless chairs, but to a furniture historian, they are gold dust. I took them home. I actually had them renovated by a chap in Lincoln. He did a fantastic job of conservating them. And after a while, I came across these adverts, and the thought occurred to me, perhaps the chairs I'd found in Europe might have been made by Joseph Newton. And I bought one to show you. Look at this. This is an immensely heavy. Just look at that. Have you ever seen anything like that? The seat is huge, and it's scalloped out, and it's chamfered off at the front to make it look really small. The interesting thing from my point of view, there is no glue used in its construction. It's all pins and it's all wedges. These spindles that come through here are all wedged. Thank you, Julian. I'm struggling with this. You'll be amazed how heavy it is. All of these joints here, every one of them are pinned. There is no glue anywhere. Isn't that fantastic? But I didn't know. I'll leave it here. Thank you, Julian. Let's put it down. I didn't know that was made by Joseph Newton. And the only thing you can do with vernacular furniture when you're looking for things like this is actually you need to find more chairs with a provenance back to the place where you think they were made. Well, he's given us some hints here that they will go by water to Nottingham, Gainsborough, Lincoln, and he sells them at Grantham as well. When I studied these chairs, I thought to myself, I'd actually seen chairs similar to this before. And I know there's people in this room have seen chairs similar to this. You've looked at them and you've walked past them. In Lincoln. They're painted black. And it hasn't dropped yet. The Wren Library in the cathedral. How many of you have been there? Yes, you've all been there. And you've looked at those chairs and you've just looked away. And I've got a picture of one of them because the lady there, Julie Taylor, the librarian, is ever so helpful. Wren Library in Lincoln. It is good Lord, isn't it? There are so many similarities. Just let me go back to the advert. 5th line down. Fourth line down. He maketh all sorts of Windsor chairs. What was he trying to tell us when he said that?
How skilled he was.
He was, but he was making different patterns. He was making ones to go in the garden, which are painted green. And if you look underneath here, the whole chair, when it was made, was painted green. You can find green paint all over it in the nooks and crannies. I think this one here, in the Wren Library, the front legs are the same, the seat's identical, the splay of the outside spindles are the same as well. I think the same person made this as that. It doesn't prove that Joseph Newton made them, but my goodness me, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? I think those are his inside chairs. They're smaller and they're painted black.
Looks a bit posher for some reason.
The reason is they've never been used. You can look at them, but my goodness me, you can't sit in them. You'd be in trouble if you did. So that's probably the reason. And I think, going back to his advert, well, there's no need to go back to it, but wouldn't it be wonderful? I would have said to you that if we want to prove that these were made by Joseph Newton, we need to find another chair in another place that's mentioned on his advert. How many of you have been to Gainsborough Old Hall? Yes. Yeah, all the hands go up. Did you notice the furniture there?
Old Rectory. Let's go Rectory.
No, you know, Gainsborough Old Hall. Gainsborough Old Hall, there is no furniture there. Well, there's virtually no furniture. There's certainly no chairs. But how many of you have been to Epworth Rectory Museum? Yes. Right. Do you want to see some pictures of chairs at Epworth Rectory Museum? That is almost identical to that. I have no doubt the person who made that. That's just outside Gainsborough in Epworth. That's downstairs. It gets better, this does. You can't make it up.
The only difference is the turned arms.
Turned underarm supports, well, then it's got blades. Yeah. If you go upstairs in Epworth, and if you haven't been, you really ought to go. That's upstairs as well. And that's got a plaque on the back as well. You can see the plaque. Yeah. Look at that. This chair was used by John Wesley, 1756. So this pattern of chair, I found it in Newark, Lincoln, and just outside Gainsborough. Do you think these chairs were made by Joseph Newton? I think it's highly likely. And I tell you what, there will be others. If I can find 3 relatively easy like that, Julian's bought one recently that turned up in Essex. There's another one got sold last year in Canterbury, and I know about at least another half a dozen more. In fact, there's one in New York. The collector's got one in New York as well, which I've got photographs on. So when you are out and about in the county looking for medieval chests, don't ever walk past these chairs. Have a good look at them and see if you think that they are made by Joseph Newton. And if they are, take some pictures and send them to me.
What's the carving on this one?
There is a bit of carving, you're right. This one has got the 2 letters HH stamped over it in about 9 or 10 places. I think they were burnt onto there. They were probably an inventory mark, I would have thought. It's nothing to do with, they're not makers. I can tell you that now, a maker would not do that. When you all go, we can give these out to you. There's a brief summary of what I've said here, and there's some pictures here as well. So you've got the pictures to look at. But at the bottom in blue, there is a site that you can go to which has a huge amount of information on Lincolnshire chairs. It's a site that Julian has set up, and there's a lot about Nottinghamshire's chairs as well. And I would encourage you all to have a look at that. I think I've spoken for long enough.
Oh, thank you.
Which one are we talking about?
Chairs that you said.
Well, that's an interesting question. Before that article in the journal, in fact, I wrote and I published, and it takes a while for furniture historians and for dealers to actually get the information to percolate down. And it has started now because the value of these things is starting to go up. And to put a value on them, if one of these appeared in Christie's or Bonhams or Sotheby's, if I wrote the lot notes, it's the sort of thing that the Metropolitan Museum in New York would like. And how you put a value on things like that, I don't. Have you got one at home, by the way? It's difficult to put a value on them, but I mean, if you ever get a chance to buy them, you will do, because they will only double and double and double again in value. I wouldn't like to know what the value is.
The one in Canterbury last year went for 1,650 plus commission.
Yeah.
And I paid a bit more than that for one I bought about 2 months ago.
Yeah. And
they're only going to get more expensive.
They will only get more and more expensive.
Once the penny drops, because they are amongst the rarest winter chairs in the world.
by the earliest known Windsor chair maker in the world. And I've obviously run this argument past other furniture historians who are much cleverer and better read than I am, and nobody has any reason to doubt that these were not made by Joseph Union.
Going back to chests, I was bequeathed a chest in the mid-80s, and it could go into the house at that time. When it came to me, on back of a lorry, eventually moved house, and the only way we could look at a house was to go in a house and say, will the chest fit here? Because I had to keep it, it was the family chest. And the place we're in now, we went in, had a vestibule, we went into a mini hall, and the chest went there. There were 2 halls either side, and so the chest is there. It's, I don't know, yeah, but it's got 1642 on the front. It's heavily carved. It's as big and chunky, and it's. I don't think it's Victorian.
Yeah, no, you're right. At any stage, anybody can carve dates onto a chest. And you're right, so you've got to be wary about dates carved on things. It's the same.
Well, I'm lumbered with it.
Sorry?
I'm lumbered with it.
Yeah.
Well, folks, we've had a wonderful start to the morning. We'll have a break now for about quarter of an hour, say? Then Julian's going to speak to us. Okay, well, thank you very much, William.